Thank you all for coming. It's nice that we have another passionate 419er here in Jay. This room is really nice to do this, and because any subject that I sort of jump onto, it's a love story. And that painting right here, the collision of the gladiator, I fell in love with that, and I have to thank Jack Santos. I didn't see Jack come in, but oh, Jack's here. Jack is a great human being, and I want to thank him for introducing me to James Russell and getting this thing going. And I also want to just say one more thing. Thank you to a gentleman who's a mentor to me, Dyke Hendrickson. Thank you for coming tonight too. So here's our hero, Benjamin Franklin Butler. To tell the story of the toothpick, which we're going to tell tonight, we need to tell the story of Ben Butler. Every person, no matter their sex, creed, or color, is entitled to the opportunity to succeed should they desire to. And that's right from Ben Butler. He was controversial, he was courageous, he was a visionary, and he was iconic.
This is from Ben Butler's book, there on the right, a positively formidable document. It is an autobiography. It is 1,100 pages long, printed in 19th century Courier font. There are 540 words on each page, and that works out to 542,000 words. It's the most exhaustive. It's like he's telling us what the 19th century was like. It's just such a wonderful document. We took this right from the book. In closing, this is how he says goodbye. I apologize most humbly for the many omissions and imperfections of my work. He was humble, and I claim for it but one merit. It has been earnestly and fairly done. And this is his poetry. He was a poet, too. What is writ is writ. Would it were worthier, but I am not now that which I have been, and my visions flit less palpably before me, and the glow which in my spirit dwelt is fluttering, faint, and low. And that's how he said goodbye.
Oh Lord, hear our prayer. We ask for the same grace that we would give Ben Butler. 100,000 mourners filed by General Butler's open casket lying in state at Lowell's Huntington Hall during 3 snowy days in January 1893. The full military funeral procession followed from Lowell City Hall to Hildreth Cemetery. 10,000 people lined the route. What kind of man gets 100,000 people at his funeral?
10,000.
No, 100,000 people filed by his casket. 100,000. 10,000 lined the route to Hildreth Cemetery in Drake, right up the street. He was born on November 5th, 1818, to his parents John Butler and Charlotte Ellison Butler in Deerfield, New Hampshire, at the Deerfield Parade. If you guys ever been to Deerfield, come to the Deerfield Fair, you drive right over there. Here's a letter from Captain John Butler to Charlotte Ellison Butler in June of 1813. That was 5 years before Ben Butler was born. I have the satisfaction of knowing that I am feared and loved by all honest good men. But the bad hate and fear me, for I am a terror to evildoers. This wasn't just a quote to his wife. This was a statement to his children. And his son, you're going to find out, Ben Butler, he lived by this. In his book, he talks about the importance of his parents. And here's a quote: "The stock from which one comes from is very material." In 1812, Captain Butler, who served under Andrew Jackson in the siege of New Orleans, and in 1819, Captain John Butler, when Ben Butler was only a year old, dies of yellow fever in the West Indies. Now, both of those are important because of his service in New Orleans during the Civil War, and in his erratic, in his elimination of yellow fever in New Orleans during that time. In 1828, Ben's mother moves her young family to Lowell, Mass. She supports them by running boarding houses for young women mill workers. In 1832, he graduates from Lowell High School. He's the first graduating class of Lowell High School. In Lowell High School, if you look where Lowell High School is, where the mills are, where his mother had a boarding house, they're all right there in the same neighborhood, all within walking distance. The railroad's right there too. In 1838, he graduates from Waterville College, which is now Colby College in Maine. This was after being denied admission to West Point. In 1840, he was admitted to the Massachusetts Bar, and in 1845, at 27 years old, he's arguing before the U.S. Supreme Court. He married Sarah Hildreth on May 16, 1844. They had 4 children: Paul Butler, who died at 5 years old; Blanche Butler Ames, who lived a very long life; Paul Butler, who was the second son who was named after the first one who passed; and then Ben Israel Butler.
This is Blanche Butler. We're told, and there are plenty of people here to quickly correct me, that Blanche was the apple of General Butler's eye. She married, actually, General Butler's chief of staff. Louder?
Just hold it right up to you.
Louder? Thank you. Little mic etiquette there. Sorry. She married a general who was on General Butler's chief of staff. I want to get this right. Adelbert. Did I do it to you? Adelbert Ames.
I call him Bert.
No, I want to get it right. Adelbert Ames. And they then had children, and Blanche, in a lot of ways, picked up the mantle from her father, and she was very active in women's rights, and it just was a linear right from her dad. And let's not forget, Adelbert Ames followed his father-in-law as governor of Massachusetts. So these folks were not shy about contributing. Now this fellow is son, he was called Benny, and he is dressed in a West Point uniform. Now, CJ's already filled you in that General Butler was denied admission to West Point. He had done everything he was supposed to, had all his references lined up, it was supposed to happen, and then somebody pulled the plug at the last minute, and he was denied. And throughout his military career, the West Pointers treated him horribly, just horribly, because he wasn't in the fratty club. And in fact, they called him the West Point reject. So General Butler made sure that Benny got accepted to West Point, and he was not going to have his son go through what he went through.
On April 25th, 1861, Lincoln appoints Butler to command the Department of Annapolis. Butler takes his Lowell, Mass. Newburyport recruited militia, now fully mustered in as Union troops by sea to Baltimore. Now, the Newburyport recruiting office is like 2 buildings over. North Row, I think is what's on the front of the building out there. Right here, right downtown here, 2 buildings over, he recruited his Newburyport militiamen. On May 13, 1861, Butler seizes control of Baltimore, quelling rioting and saving Washington from encirclement by rebel forces. Maryland was right on that line where, there was sort of that sense that, that war wasn't from them, and there was an opportunity for the Confederates to seize Baltimore at that time, and then they would have encircled Washington, D.C., and essentially they could have ended the war right away because they could have taken Washington from the north or from the south. As you know, General Lee's home, Arlington Place, sat right across the Potomac looking right at the Capitol building. So you could see Washington from his own home. That's how close the Confederate troops were to them to the south. I mean, it was just right over the Potomac. And then, of course, if they would have taken Baltimore, it would have been, they would have had advantage from the north. The first 2 casualties of the Civil War were from Butler's Lowell Brigade. And that happened, by the way, 2 weeks after Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was the first official battle of the Civil War. So, at that point, it becomes reality. We're in war now. So 2 weeks, Butler puts a militia together and, gets everything in order and makes his way to Baltimore by sea to save Baltimore and to save D.C.
Yeah, the rebels, sympathizers, blew the tracks from the north. You couldn't get to Baltimore by train. And, this supposedly non-educated military man, General Butler, puts all his troops on ship, knew what he was doing, shipboard, and he brought them around into Baltimore from the sea without orders. Lincoln called him and needed help. There wasn't anybody. The guy was the first one out of the gate.
On May 27, 1861, he issues the contraband decision at Fort Monroe. This decision was very important because I'll read this to you. A Virginia slave owner tries to seize his escaped slaves sheltering at Fort Monroe. Commanding General Ben Butler refuses. The slaves as Confederate property were being used to wage war, and therefore that property was legally seizable as contraband of war. This was the precursor to the Emancipation Proclamation. This was the first order to emancipate slaves. Congress, on August 6, 1861, Congress passes the first Confiscation Act supporting Butler's Fort Monroe contraband decision. New Orleans, which was at the time was the largest city in the South, it was also it was the richest city in the South. On April 24, 1862, New Orleans surrenders. The first day of surrender, Butler contains a near way. As you can imagine, the people of New Orleans were under siege, and they were not too happy. We've got these Yankees that came down and, took over New Orleans. William Mumford, a local gambler, tears down the Union flag from the Mint Building, shredding it and giving pieces to the mob. This embarrassed Ben Butler. Butler had him arrested and convicts him of treason and hangs him. He had to create law and order, and he made an example out of Mumford. This gave him the reputation and the nickname Beast Butler. They thought it was a cool, punishment to hang a man for vandalizing the Union flag. As a military governor of New Orleans, he issues General Order Number 28, the Women Order. And I'm going to read that to you. As the officers and soldiers of the United States have been subject to repeated insults from the women calling themselves ladies of New Orleans in return for their most scrupulous non-interference and courtesy on our part, it is ordered that hereafter, when any female shall by word, gesture, or movement insult or show contempt for any officer or soldier of the United States, she shall be regarded and held liable to be treated as a woman of the town, client, or avocation. That's by command of Major General Butler. Now, I'll just tell you this story. You can imagine Admiral Farragut, who commanded the Navy troops in New Orleans.
That's the original.
Here's the original. Admiral Farragut, who commanded the troops, was the commander of the Navy. Is there something you want to say? Did you have a question? Oh, okay. All right, great. You're in shock. Oh, now you're not rooting for Butler? Well, let me explain. I like that. A little conflict. General Butler, Admiral Farragut had came in, and obviously the women of New Orleans were very upset that these Yankees had come in and taken over, right? So Admiral Farragut walks by the French Quarter, which we see right here. This is the French Quarter we all know and love. And they take their chamber pots filled with, you know what, 1 and 2. Everybody knows what 1 and 2 is. And they dumped them on the Admiral Farragut, the commander of the Navy. And that embarrassed Ben Butler. Not only did it embarrass Ben Butler, but it undermined law and order. So the only way that he could to get law and order was to punish or to treat women, and actually, you could almost say that it was a equal rights moment. But these women were swearing and spitting on these soldiers because they couldn't respond back because they were women. And here we go. This is a chamber pot that has Ben Butler's face emblazoned on it. So there's part of your revenge. You can be happy now. Yeah, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. So you put that out. How was it enforced?
How was it enforced? Well, whenever.
Arrests?
Well,
Yes.
I wasn't there, but I will give you. I would think that when a woman would, show disrespect to Ben Butler's soldiers, that they would arrest her. I would imagine that would be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
There isn't a lot of data on it, but I'm sure if I dug through another 500 pages.
I'm sure. Well, I'll just say this. In today's world, if somebody breaks the law, it's enforced by the police and law and order. And the same held true there. They also outlaw.
It's a good question.
It is a good question. They also outlaw the playing of the Bonnie Blue Flag song, and General Butler seized all the sheet music and shut down its New Orleans-based publisher. Now here we found a picture of one of the sheet music, and it was presented to a Confederate general by the name of Albert Pike. Does anybody know who Albert Pike was? He was a Confederate general, but he was also a school principal right here in Newburyport. But Newburyport doesn't like to talk about their Confederate generals in town here. So we're going to play you a little version of the Bonnie Blue Flag.
So I want to kind of set the scene here. We showed you the French Quarter. French Quarter, New Orleans, folks. That's been there. Okay, we all know what it is. I hope if you were there, you made it through Mardi Gras. At any rate, so what was going on was there wasn't just one incident, with the chamber pot. This was going on a regular basis. What was going on with the ladies are up on that second floor balcony. Miss Scarlett, my land, the Yankees are coming. Sheridan, fetch me my chamber pot. And meanwhile, they're singing the Bonnie Blue Flag. Now, this is an insurrectionist anthem. This is a 4-minute long song, which I promise I'm not going to play. It has a chorus, and that's what we're going to play. And it calls on the hearer to arm themselves. It was inciting to riot. And General Butler's no fool. He knew what was going on. He just came from a similar situation in Baltimore. So he outlawed this. He went to the publisher. The publisher of it was from New Orleans. He seized all of the manuscripts and issued an order that anyone singing or humming the Bonnie Blue Flag would be arrested and fined $25. But think about it. You got 150,000 people. He's got maybe 10,000 men, half of which are always being drawn up to Vicksburg to help Grant.
Play the song, Larry.
Okay.
No.
Are you taking questions?
We prefer to take questions at the end.
That's the chorus, and the rest of it goes through the whole, every state, etc.
Butler's response to that song is, "I'm not against Southern rights, I am against Southern wrongs." Yep. Here's our character, Ben Butler. He was sort of the Donald Trump of his time. He was vilified in most, and not politically speaking, but the media sort of treated him as sort of the, he was a hated figure, and they drew him like this. He was not an attractive man. He was 5'4" tall. And so it was easy to sort of make fun of this Yankee from Boston or from old Massachusetts. And here he is. There's a story that he confiscated, because of his Confiscation Act, silverware from the ladies of New Orleans. And so they called him, not only did they call him Beast Butler, but they called him Spoons Butler. And I like this specific cartoon. And this is a NAS cartoon, because it was during his presidential run in 1884, but he's on this cartoon depicted schooner America right here, which I think is a beautiful picture. He was Thomas Nast's favorite character, and he was constantly in cartoons in every newspaper in the country.
Okay, this is what General Butler wrote to his troops as he was basically relieved of military command by President Lincoln. This is the commemorative medal that was given to them. Freedom will be theirs by the sword. To the colored troops of the Army of the James. In this army, you have been treated not as laborers, but as soldiers. You have shown yourselves worthy of the uniform you wear. The best officers of the Union seek to command you. Your bravery has won the admiration even of those who would be your masters. Your patriotism, fidelity, and courage have illustrated the best qualities of manhood. With the bayonet, you have unlocked the iron-barred gates of prejudice, opening new fields of freedom, liberty, and equality of right to yourselves and your race forever. Comrades of the Army of the James, I bid you farewell, farewell.
Before 1860, he was a Democrat known for supporting labor rights and temperance, but also for his states' rights ideals. He wanted to keep the Union together. In 1860, he supported John C. Breckinridge after briefly backing Jefferson Davis at the Democrat National Convention. Jefferson Davis, he thought, was their greatest chance of keeping the Union together. He found out that he wasn't as moderate as he thought he was. In 1864, Butler turns down Lincoln's offer for him to run as his VP candidate. Ben Butler could have easily, maybe not easily, but he could have challenged Lincoln in 1864 for president. So both Lincoln and McClellan both offered him the position of vice president. He turned them both down, sort of rudely. I don't have the exact quote of that, but you know, he basically said if he didn't want to preside over the Senate because he thought it was boring because he couldn't say anything. And Ben Butler liked to talk. Matter of fact, the toothpick is named Ben Butler's toothpick because they said finally a toothpick big enough to fit in Ben Butler's mouth. On March 4th, between March 4th, 1867 and 1875, he served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, both from the Mass 6, which he ran from a tent at Bayview, which is right across the Ipswich Bay in Gloucester. And also he served out of Lowell. In 1871, he introduced the Ku Klux Klan Act to combat paramilitary vigilantes of the KKK. The KKK was sort of founded to hinder freed slaves and African Americans the right to be able to vote, and they really wanted to maintain control of the freed blacks, and they did that by we all know the stories of what the Ku Klux Klan is. In 1871, he led the ratification of the River and Harbor Bill, which led to the financing of these the front and the rear range lights, harbor range lights that are right here. And in connection with that, the toothpick was built in the same year, 1873. In 1863, he purchases Bayview in Gloucester on Ipswich Bay, which is still in the family's, under the family's care, and it's a very beautiful place. We had the opportunity to visit with Michael and T at Bayview, and you can look from their home in Ipswich, and you can almost understand why Ben Butler built the toothpick. But we'll talk about that as we move on. In 1873, he purchased Yacht America, which is the famous schooner, the black schooner they call it, that won a race in 1851 that ended up turning into a trophy which they called the America's Cup. And we have right up here, Michael brought us a wonderful item, which is a plank from the schooner Americas, which is right here. It looks like a brick, but it is actually a plank from that schooner. And in the 1890s, 1873, he oversaw the construction of the harbor range lights in the Day Beacon number 10, aka the toothpick. In the 1890s, he continued to practice law and remains politically active, arguing cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. The schooner America was an important part of his later life, and I talked about it being the legendary vessel that the America's Cup was named after. Here is the Americas after it was painted white. Don McKay, who's overlooking my shoulder right here, did a rehabilitation of the schooner America after Ben Butler had purchased it in the 1870s, and then it was refitted and it was straightened and the hull was painted white later on, and that right there is Bayview, and there is the Americas, and maybe, you know, I bet you maybe Ben Butler was out there on that ship. I can barely almost see his bald head, but
We got a nod.
we got a nod. So, and that is with the white hull, so we like that. We like that picture. The Starboard Fawn, which was a steamboat that was built in 1875 in Philadelphia, and it was originally for the Centennial Fair, the 100th anniversary of the United States transportation, and it was purchased by Butler's Pentucket Navigation Company in 1879. And this would come up from Haverhill all the way up the river into Newburyport to his wharf here, and then I could imagine that it would go up to Black Rocks, and it would drop off some passengers to spend the day at Salisbury Beach. On January 11th, 1893, he dies suddenly from a bronchial infection in Washington, D.C., one day after arguing a case before the Supreme Court. So from the time he was 27 until he died, he was arguing before the Supreme Court. He was the first Union general to actively protect fugitive slaves. That was the early move towards the Emancipation Proclamation. He was controversial but effective administrator of New Orleans during wartime. And he was a strong advocate for civil rights during Reconstruction. He was the governor of Massachusetts from 1883 to 1884. When he was governor, he appointed the first Irish American and African American judges in the country. He was an early supporter of women's suffrage. He allowed for the first woman to talk before Congress about women's right to vote. Women did not receive suffrage until 1920. So he was working on women's suffrage in the 1860s. This man, he also appointed the first woman administrator to office, which was Clara Barton, the famous nurse. She was the head of like the health department in Massachusetts. But he had Blanche in his ear, and he listened to her. He listened to his daughter. He created the first laws for labor rights, including the 10-hour workday, even though his wife wanted him to make it an 8-hour workday. He was instrumental in improving navigation safety on the Merrimack River, the Black Rock Speaking, in concert with the range light system in Newburyport Harbor. As you can see, we've got this wonderful little map that shows where Bayview is in Gloucester, and you can see the waypoint to the toothpick, and then you can see another light that sort of heads towards Newburyport, and I believe that points directly at the front and rear range lights. We found this on the internet, and it's a photograph that sort of demonstrates sort of how it worked. So if you can imagine, okay. Larry, can you just go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the toothpick as Ben Butler built this. Okay, it was 35 feet high. It's 20 feet high now. But in 1947, there was a hurricane that destroyed this original toothpick, which was 35 feet high, and it was 20 feet wide, which is 5 feet wider than is now. And you can almost visualize, can you go back 2 slides? You can almost visualize that Ben Butler could look out from Gloucester and he could see this toothpick. Now, at the time, the north and south jetties were not there. They didn't exist. And also at the time, you didn't have, higher houses like you have in Plum Island. So, Plum Island didn't get in the way with their houses, and you didn't have the jetties in the way. So you could almost visualize that he could set out on the Americas, put his nose on the toothpick, come into the mouth of the Merrimack, and then put his nose on the front, line up the range lights and make his way into Newburyport Harbor. I can see it. My friend Larry and I, we took my boat out to, you can go ahead and advance these. We took my boat out onto the Merrimack, and we took a picture of the riverside here. And as you can see, that's the landslide, or as an artist has depicted, it's the beach side of the toothpick, as marked on the toothpick in graffiti. As you can see, the toothpick has seen its better days. I mean, the base is rotting, the bricks, the mortar inside the bricks is disintegrating, and there's missing slats on the toothpick itself. The only public, and it's not even really public, memorial for Ben Butler is at the reservation in Salisbury, and you have to pay to get in there, during, between, June and October. But this is the only public memorial for this great man who emancipated slaves, who fought for women's suffrage, who appointed the first Irish-American judge, the first African-American judge. This is his only memorial. And you can see it sits in a nice little, wonderful little park right by the boat launch at the reservation. And you can see in the distance, in the far distance, you can see the toothpick out there. It's actually beautiful to visit, but it's very hard to find. I don't know if has anybody ever been there? Yeah. Right. Yeah.
There's no signage directly.
Yeah, there's no. All right. So we did a digitally repaired version. Our friend Peter Hahn did a digitally repaired version of the toothpick. The graffiti removed. I don't know how anybody's going to know what the beach is now. The rotted slats have been replaced. The granite blocks have been pointed, and it needs to be painted. I mean, it probably needs more than that, but that's a start anyway. And there's Larry and myself. We went out with our wives and our friend Sarah here. We went out on my boat, and as you can see, it was not a calm day out there, but it was good for the girls. It scared the hell out of me. But there you can see the toothpick behind Larry and me, and the one thing I want you guys to notice about this whole picture is how wonderful my hair is.
Okay, Elvis. You wish you looked this good.
Well, I hope I look that good when I'm your age. Oh, he's a handsome guy for 72.
This is over. Here we go. Okay, we're going to read this eulogy that was actually not read at General Butler's funeral, but was read at a commemorative service near the State House. Soldier was he by birthright, and not by grace of school. He would rather win on the crudest plan than lose by the strictest rule. New Hampshire's bosom of granite, by sun and tempest wooed, no pygmy bears to the planet, nurses no puny brood. Such as he was, she made him, tender and brave, strong, not over meek with the haughty, not over weak with the wrong. Holders of bonds and of bondsmen looked on his deeds aghast. He broke the bonds and he mocked at the sacred things of caste. but the helpless poor divined him, and knew him, I, at his best. Who needed a friend could find him, he spared his foes the quest. On his country's storied pages, his name is written large, citizen, soldier, statesman, faithful to every charge. That's James Jeffrey Roach, delivered that in 1893.
So our hero here, for decades after his death, there was bills before the Massachusetts legislature to build an equestrian statue on the State House grounds. As a matter of fact, it passed before the Senate. I don't understand why it was never built. I mean, they even allocated funds for this building of this statue for this great man. It was never done. It should have been done. I mean, if there should be a statue in America for anybody, it should be for him. Matter of fact, Albert Pike, if you guys remember in 1820, Albert Pike, 2020, oh my Lord.
Yeah.
In 2020, if you guys remember the Black Lives Matter movement in Washington, D.C., they tore down a statue and they burned the statue. Well, that was of Albert Pike, the son of Newburyport. And he had a statue in Washington, D.C., and we can't get this man, Ben Butler, a statue of all the things that he did. There was a memorial at his grave. There's a beautiful memorial at his grave. Larry and I both attempted to see this memorial, but it was locked up, so we couldn't get to it. The toothpick is the only publicly accessible memorial to Ben Butler, and it's running into the sea. So I came across this story. I like to read old newspaper articles, and this story is remarkable. A southern man on a long walk passes through town, and this was in 1914, and it was in Amesbury, Massachusetts. This gentleman, John Thomas Blackwell, in the most popular sport in the 19th century and the early 20th century was this sport called pedestrian, and one of the most popular pedestrians of all time was he actually owned the Newburyport Herald, and he lived in Salisbury, and he had a strawberry farm. He died in the 50s. His name was Colonial Jack Crone. Anybody ever heard of Colonial Jack Crone? Well, Jack walked around the perimeter of the United States more than once, and he's quite a character. And my friend who was here on the earlier show introduced me to Jack Crone, and I did a piece on him. But anyway, I want to read this story here. John Thomas Blackwell, a colored man, 87 years of age, of Tennessee, who was walking from his home in the south to see his brother at Bangor, Maine, stopped at Lake Attitash at 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon. He told some very interesting reminiscences of his life. He was born a slave, and the last time he was sold brought $1,800. He's 6'2" in height and weighs 230 pounds. His appetite has always been good, and he has never missed a meal. While he is walking, he says he finds people are very kind and hardly ever has been refused a meal he wears, begging upon his feet, never wearing shoes. Now this gentleman reminds me, who does this guy remind you of? He reminds me of Big Jim from Huckleberry Finn, or from Tom Sawyer, right? So Larry, I always joke, Larry wants to be Tom Sawyer, but I know I'm Tom Sawyer. He's definitely Huckleberry Finn. And this is our sort of our Big Jim on our story. And his purpose of passing through Lowell was to see the grave of General Butler. He was in New Orleans when Butler captured the city and proved a good friend to all the Negroes. He stated that he had been now just 5 months and a half walking from Bristol, Tennessee, en route to Bangor. His route lay through Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. This man was on a journey to honor Ben Butler. Larry and I sort of went on that same journey, and we went to the Hildreth Cemetery in Lowell, and it was locked. My wife was there too. I tried to get her to push me over the fence, but she said I was going to hurt myself. But it's a beautiful memorial if you could get in to see it, but you can't. or maybe you can this time of year, but at the time you couldn't. Go ahead.
It's open on his birthday every year on November 5th.
So November 5th, we can see it?
And there will be reenactors, war reenactors there, there to play the trumpet and hold their arms or whatever.
Excellent.
So I'm a meeting that you can blame for the cemetery being locked up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a private family cemetery,
Yep.
and every first Sunday in November every
Right.
year, there is a ceremony for him, and the Sons of the Confederates, a regiment of the Sons of the Confederates,
The Sons of the Revolution.
of the,
Confederates.
of the Civil War.
Of the Civil
Sorry, the Sons of the Civil War. Anyway, they come and they do a really moving little ceremony, and we have the cemetery open. It's in the morning, and if you look at the Lowell Sun, it's always advertised, but it's the first Sunday in November. And you're all invited.
Great to hear that. When we were there, we didn't know. We didn't know.
We could keep it open all year. We don't have the funds to do that.
Right.
It's a private family cemetery. and
But it's a beautiful memorial.
It's a lovely memorial. It was done by Bella Lyon Pratt, and if you want to see a picture of it, we have it on our.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And Delbert
Delbert is also here.
Ames, it's a beautiful monument as well.
Yeah.
I'm more spry than him. I kind of crawled up and got my phone over there, and he pulled me back.
So, we went to Lowell on a journey to find Ben Butler, and the day we went. Obviously, we spent some time in the library, but we also tried to find his bus, but it was closed that day. We also we tried, and we really tried in vain to sort of discover who Ben Butler was, but we never found any. We were locked away at every gate, and it's unfortunate. I believe that it would be wonderful to be able to honor this man. I mean, we need to give this man his flowers. He deserves his flowers.
Sorry. Yes.
It just seems to me that he deserves our money to restore Ben Butler's.
We're going there next.
Absolutely.
Absolutely going there next.
Yeah, that is our goal.
Thank you, Matt. That is
We're gonna just give us one more minute, and then we'll get right to you guys. But
Okay.
I'm gonna let my friend.
Yeah,
I just want to say one thing before we get to this part. So, I'm a writer, and I fall in love with my subjects. I told you that I fell in love with this painting, thanks to Jack Santos, and I wrote about it. And when I met Larry 5 months ago, and I told him about this project, he jumped on board, and we decided to do this project together. And I'm going to tell you, I absolutely fell in love with Larry. Larry made this easy, and I'm not too manly to say that I fell in love with Larry in this project, and we had an adventure. I introduced him. Does anybody know what a boot mill is? I introduced Larry to a boot mill
Never had one of those.
at Arthur's. I guess Arthur's is the right place to get a boot mill, right? So we had a boot mill in Arthur's. But Larry wrote this beautiful poem, and I'm going to let him read the poem, and I have a gift for each one of you that are here tonight.
CJ came to me and he said, well, could you write a poem about this? And I've been writing poems since I was grade school, and I can't sit down and just say I'm going to write a poem. It happens. Something happens, and I said, wow, it started coming in my head, and I go write it. So at first I said, no, I can't do that. I just can't sit down. And then all of a sudden I thought about everything that I've done, talking to everyone, and Michael and Tia, a wonderful day we had at Bayview, and all of a sudden I said, I got it. Of course, it happened. Black Rock's Day Beacon, number 10, built by the hands of Ben Butler, protecting the unwary, ill-guided mariners from the treacherous Merrimac's end. at Salisbury's Black Rocks across from Newburyport, Mass, standing vigil for 150 years. Named the toothpick by Nasty Nast, Derision, Vilification, Ben Butler, Target, and Spear. From Lowell, Haverhill, Newburyport, Salisbury, and Gloucester too. Always for the downtrodden, the persecuted, men, women, children, sojourners of any crew. Butler's Beacon, the toothpick, today rotting, sadly, graffiti, smeared. What if General Butler were to magically appear? Seeing it, he'd build his granite and pyramid even higher. Why? Because it needed doing. He'd do it no matter the jeers.
That's a beautiful name. And thank you, Larry. I'd like to thank Michael Wall, Director of the American Maritime Models, and Sarah T. Wall, the third great-granddaughter of Ben Butler. Just thank you guys for your hospitality and welcoming us into this story and allowing us to tell this story. I'm not gonna pretend like it's not a little bit overwhelming to tell this story in front of all of his family, because, you guys have lived this story. You guys have probably known Ben Butler since you were old enough to know anything. So, we've just gone on this adventure to discover who Ben Butler was. And we thank you for your grace tonight. And we thank you all for coming and being here. I also want to thank James Russell, the Executive Director of the Custom House Maritime Museum, Richard Howe, lifelong Lowell resident, historian, and former North Middlesex County Register of Deeds. Some of you probably know him. Chris Scott, the former city editor of the Lowell Sun. We read through at least 6 books. We studied the internet. We studied the Library of Congress. We went to every library from here to Lowell, Massachusetts, to discover who this man was. And here's our sources. So we hope that we did this story due diligence, and we hope that we can restore the toothpick. We had representatives here earlier from Salisbury, and they have vowed to help with that process. I just want to say the front and the rear range lighthouses are both historic sites. In Salisbury, we have one historic building, which is a diner that is run down and decrepit, and it's in bad shape. We haven't done a good job of identifying historic buildings in Salisbury. But the toothpick is part of that 1873 system of navigational points in Newburyport, and we hope that we can get the toothpick restored, and we're working on that. We're going to work